Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin in the Yukon, where a man from Pelly Crossing wants the Whitehorse Hospital to do better when discharging rural patients who arrive by medevac. Opposition politicians say a medical lodge for rural Yukoners would help, but there's been no action on a government promise to build one. Cheryl Kawaja reports.
Mike Dobson ended up here in Whitehorse after going to his local health centre in Pelly Crossing.
I got medevac due to a heart issue. So I got sent down here to Whitehorse General Hospital, and then when it came about 1:15 in the morning, after all the tests and everything were done, they decided that it was time for me to be discharged. They were like, "Well, you can either get a hotel room at your own cost, or we can pay for a taxi to take you to the Whitehorse Emergency Shelter." I don't have the money to pay for a hotel room out of my own pocket, and Whitehorse Emergency Shelter is ridden with drugs. I have family members who passed away there. It's not something that's really conducive to a healthy lifestyle.
Dobson says he's been sober for a decade. He says he pleaded his case to hospital staff.
And the charge nurse came back and she was talking in a very condescending tone towards me, saying, "Well, we'll make a one-time exception for you, and you can stay in one of our isolation rooms."
Both Yukon opposition parties say change is needed when it comes to caring for rural patients who end up in the city.
The current government did commit to developing a medical travel lodge in Whitehorse. That also was the subject of a motion in the Legislative Assembly, which all parties supported the concept of creating a medical travel lodge for rural communities, and there has not been any action on that.
NDP leader Kate White agrees, but she notes the Yukon party also didn't do anything when it was in power.
I was horrified. I am horrified. And this isn't new. Previously, Jim Trudger, who was MLA for Mayo-Tatchin, got a call one night when someone had been medevaced in from Keno and then was released in the middle of the night with no shoes and no wallet.
White says having to take a medevac is stressful enough without the added worry.
Coming in from a community isn't easy. Coming in from a community in medical distress is not easy, and it doesn't mean that you're prepared and that you have everything that you need. And it certainly also doesn't mean that you have the money or the funds at that point to get yourself a hotel room in the middle of the night.
For his part, Dobson says the whole episode was stressful. CBC reached out to the Yukon government and the Yukon Hospital Corporation. Neither were available for comment. Cheryl Kawaja, CBC News, Whitehorse.
We have an update now to a story we brought you about dental equipment in the NWT's Beaufort Delta region that wasn't properly sanitized. This fall, the NWT Chief Public Health Office advised some Beaufort Delta dental patients to get tested for HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C due to that equipment. Today, the NWT Chief Public Health Office announced it has not received any reports of illnesses related to those dental procedures. It says healthcare providers are required to report cases of communicable diseases. Cancer patients in Canada are facing a troubling financial burden. That's according to a new report by the Canadian Cancer Society. It turns out patients and their families spend thousands of dollars on expenses not covered by our universal healthcare system. Jennifer Yoon has those details.
When Vanessa Percoco was diagnosed with advanced colorectal cancer at 31, she expected to take time off work. What she didn't expect was that fighting the disease would be so expensive.
Medication, colostomy bags, going to the hospital, the gas, the parking tickets.
Throughout 2 years of treatment, she paid more than $4,000 out of pocket for prescription drugs alone and struggled to pay her bills.
I was like, should I get the medication to feel better during chemo, or should I keep the money to pay my rent?
A new report from the Canadian Cancer Society suggests she's not alone. Across Canada, patients and their loved ones spent approximately $7.5 billion in 2024 on cancer-related expenses. Out-of-pocket costs include transportation, medical devices, drugs, and more. All this adds up to an average of approximately $33,000 per patient.
There are individuals that are at lower income or fixed income, individuals in rural and remote locations, which can really feel this impact.
Some say it's a wake-up call.
We need to have some very serious discussions about this to ensure that we have equitable access.
Many patients who can't afford extra costs turn to fundraisers. On GoFundMe alone, thousands of people are looking for help, paying for housing, travel costs, or treatments that aren't covered by Medicare.
Not everyone is fortunate enough to have family that supports them, or or have a community that is able to provide that extra support.
Experts are hoping this report starts a conversation and gets policymakers to take action so cancer patients don't have to rely on the generosity of others to fight the disease. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
A recently released report says Nunavut's economy is too focused on mining, and more support is needed for traditional Inuit practices like hunting and art. TJ Deer explains.
The report is called Pinasunik, Reflections on a Northern Indigenous Economy. It finds that only 2.5% of non-Indigenous Nunavummiut are unemployed, compared with 12.3% of Indigenous Nunavummiut. The report also says a $50 investment in local hunting and harvesting can provide country food for 20 people. The same investment in a local grocery store would provide lower quality meat for only 4 people. The idea for the report came from Kunuk Inutik, who's one of the editors. She talks about part of the conversations that were had before the research for the report began.
If we're to look at the spaces where people are in an empowered position to practice economy on their own terms, and let's do that.
The report was published by the Yellowhead Institute in Toronto. It was launched in Iqaluit over the weekend. Public conversations about the report and the state of Nunavut's economy were had. Hayden King is Yellowhead's executive director and also edited the report. He says the conversations with Inutik led them to asking what the economic framework is in Nunavut.
I think once we started to do the research, we saw these pretty dramatic disparities between Inuit and non-Inuit, and an economy for a certain demographic, but that demographic not really being Inuit.
King says the report is meant to start a conversation about what kind of economy makes sense for Inuit. The full report can be found on the Yellowhead Institute's website. TJ Deer, CBC News, Iqaluit.
A challenge to the 2023 Gwich'in election in Sigachik has been dismissed. NWT Supreme Court Justice Sheila McPherson released her written decision in the case on Friday. McPherson says there was not enough evidence to support the Gwich'in Tribal Council's objections to the election. The CBC's Des Loreen has more.
The Gwich'in Tribal Council argued that there were problems with the way the election was held. The allegations included that voters were not given proper notice of the election and that the acclaimed Mavis Clark should not have been eligible to run. And they wanted the results to be declared invalid. McPherson says the election was not perfect, but it was held in accordance to election rules established by the Gwich'in. The decision upholds Mavis Clark's acclamation as the president of the Sigachik Council. Clark declined an interview but sent a press release saying that the decision has been long awaited and we are ready to embrace the future with renewed energy. Earlier today, the GTC released a statement saying that they would review the court's decision and is considering its next steps. GTC CEO Jamie Cooey says the council is reviewing the court decisions this week. Des Loreen, CBC News, Inuvik.
Cancelled flights in Fort Smith NWT have been causing frustration for residents, especially for those relying on them for medical appointments. Carla Ulrich has been looking into this and she joins me now with more. So Carla, what's the issue here?
So the issue is that several Northwestern Airlease or NWAL flights have been cancelled over the last couple of weeks. Terry Harold is the president of NWAL. He told us the airline currently operates with one crew, consisting of one captain and a co-pilot. While weather has been an issue, the bigger challenge is retaining pilots. Take a listen.
Some of the young guys, of course, like the big city. Their careers are aimed at going on to airlines. So as soon as they get the minimum number of hours that an airliner take, well, they leave.
Harold did acknowledge the hardships it's causing for their passengers, though.
And Carla, tell us more about how these canceled flights are affecting community members in Fort Smith.
So I talked to Shannon Coleman. She's a Fort Smith resident. Her flight earlier this month was canceled and she missed an important medical appointment. She was able to rebook, but not for another 2 weeks.
It is very frustrating, especially like on short notice. Like you have these appointments booked, you have all the prep work, and like time is of the essence for some of these tests.
Coleman also said these cancellations are particularly hard on elders and people with disabilities. Despite the inconvenience, Coleman empathizes with Northwestern Air Lease's staffing struggles.
And are there any solutions on the horizon right now?
Yeah, so in the meantime, Harold says they are chartering other planes to cover some routes, although this is only a short-term solution. He's hopeful better weather in the new year will improve operations. In the meantime, the airline is also exploring other solutions.
So we have sort of a revolving door, you might say, of people coming and going. We're looking to bring in some older guys that are more stable. I don't know, trying to get people that are interested in living here.
Harold says training pilots is a lot of work, so they need to find people willing to stay long-term. But he wants residents to know they are doing their best to maintain a regular schedule.
Okay, thanks so much for all of your work on this, Carla.
Thanks, Megan.
Shop owners in Whitehorse are fed up with break-ins, property damage, and theft. Many are calling for changes to the criminal justice system, but experts say that won't get to the root of the problem. Megan Dooling explains.
Broke it, and then, the glass was still intact up top, but in the hole, and the one guy came in and then ransacked the place.
The owner of Wines by Design says the people who broke her front door at the end of November and stole a cash box and some speakers are lucky she wasn't waiting for them with a baseball bat.
Honestly, I would not blame anybody for harming somebody if they broke into their business or their home, their home, because they're just protecting what's theirs.
Maxinook isn't alone in her frustration.
There's no consequences from the justice system. And I've been in discussions where people are pretty certain that it's probably no more than 8 or 10 people causing 80 to 90% of the problems. But there's nothing that's effectively being done to protect the business community.
Many businesses echoed this sentiment to CBC. A criminal lawyer in Vancouver says the justice system isn't the problem.
To the extent that you see upticks in property crime, it's usually almost always associated with upticks in addiction, poverty, and other issues that are far more socioeconomic in nature than just the question of criminal law.
Statistics show break-ins, theft, and property damage have decreased across Canada since the 1990s. That's not the case in Whitehorse, where these crimes have increased since the COVID-19 pandemic.
Social issues are definitely factors for some folks, and economic factors like unemployment, poverty. It's pretty complex. I don't think there's a global answer, but those types of things definitely come into play. In addition to, if somebody is involved with using drugs, it can be very expensive, unfortunately.
Sergeant McLeod says there might be a perception in Whitehorse that it's just a handful of people behind the rash of property crimes. She says while there are repeat offenders, that's not the case for every break-in. Tony Paisana, the criminal defense lawyer in Vancouver, says the right to bail is protected by the Charter. He says when someone's at the start of their criminal cycle, it takes a while for their criminal record to catch up to their activities. The executive director of the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition says for the problem to be properly addressed, members of the marginalized community need to be a part of the conversation. And she says those relationships take time to build. She says people need to check their assumptions and dig into stigma. She says real data is needed.
Is it repeat offenders? What are people stealing? Instead of this anecdotal, oh, I've had this experience and I've had this experience and let's put it up on Facebook for Whitehorse property crime, and we all become alarmed and look at each other with suspicion.
But things are as tenuous as ever right now.
For Donna Reimkin at the North End Gallery, time may be running out. For her, business has been a struggle since the pandemic, and the cost of the repeat break-ins make matters worse. For her, it's becoming a matter of whether she can stay in business at all. Megan Dooling, CBC News, Whitehorse.
Over 60 Yellowknifers gathered on Friday for a vigil to raise awareness about violence against women. It was part of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. That's an international campaign that runs from November 25th until December 10th. The CBC's Nadir Hashmi has more.
Several Northerners reflected on their personal stories of facing gender-based violence. The vigil not only honored the victims of the Montreal massacre 35 years ago, but also people in the NWT who have experienced gender-based violence and those who lost their lives to it.
I'm here as an NWT resident, as a Yellowknifer, to honor the memories of these 14 women who have tragically lost their lives due to gender-based violence, and the hope is prevention. May this never happen again.
A guest speaker spoke about the link between generational trauma and intimate partner violence. She shared how her mother's experience at residential school impacted her childhood growing up.
I was also placed in foster homes growing up, in about 10 different foster homes from the age 10 years old to 17 years old. And during that time, I accepted any form of love, whether that's based on violence.
Wedson said people who deal with a difficult childhood often are more vulnerable in such situations.
They will accept any form of love, whether it is hitting or slapping or yelling, because all they want is love in their life. And I say that because those were my experiences. My experience was accepting abuse and accepting violence.
She urged people in abusive relationships to seek help, and that organizations like YWCA supported her in her journey. Another speaker spoke about losing a sister to gender-based violence.
Because I lost my sister, the one who helped raise me, the one who was born before me. I lost her to gender-based violence. She was killed by her husband in Zimbabwe.
Because of his experience, Mthong Visa says he's become a life coach for men. He works with them to teach emotional regulation and help reduce violence.
So I do coach, I talk to men everywhere I am.
The vigil concluded with the laying of roses in memory of the victims, and shortly after, a moment of silence was observed. Nadir Hashmi, CBC News, Yellowknife.
This holiday season, the Yukon Food Security Network is reminding Yukoners that many in the territory are going hungry. Food insecurity remains a major challenge across the north. The network is a collaboration between the United Way, the Yukon Food Bank, the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition, and the Yukon First Nations Education Directorate.
There are people that break down in front of me when I'm working with them at the food bank. So I'm going to say that's why the Food Security Network is there. Food security is a mountain, and we're trying to climb it. And if you use that metaphor, then I'm going to say that that mountain's been growing over the last 20 years. Somehow, like maybe the plates, the tectonic plates around us are shifting. I don't know.
Whiteside says donations are badly needed. The Yukon Food Bank is looking for money, non-perishable food, and essential goods. A new Inuit-led documentary series is getting up close to polar bears and the humans who live among them. Nanook Narratives follows Inuit communities as they interact with the Davis Strait polar bear population. People from Nunavut, Nunavik, Nunatsiavut, and Greenland were all part of the series. The filmmakers say Inuit knowledge is vital to the polar bear's survival.
But what hasn't been shared as much is the perspectives and knowledge of the people who actually live alongside polar bears. And so this idea of hearing Inuit voices understanding their observations and perspectives is a really important part of moving forward with any kind of conservation and stewardship with polar bears.
The series is now available on YouTube. Radical Stitch is an exhibit featuring Indigenous beadwork from Canada and the United States. And its only stop in Atlantic Canada was at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in Fredericton. Take a look.
Look at that. I beaded that myself. Yeah, 100%.
The title, Radical Stitch, I think demonstrates the multifaceted ways that beadwork becomes fine art, and also the fact that a lot of the times it was made at the kitchen table. That is the site of resistance and the site of storytelling. My name is Emma Hassensall-Purley, and I'm originally from Nunavut, or Tobic First Nation in Western New Brunswick, and I've been the curator of Indigenous art here at the gallery for 2 years. I've had that title. I had reached out to one of the curators on Facebook, and I said, is the show coming to the East Coast at all? I kind of figured maybe Halifax would take it. She said, no, we don't have any Atlantic venues on its tour. I said, would it be possible that it comes to Beaverbrook? And then here we are.
So when we got the request, we were thrilled. Oh my God, my name is so long. Okay, Sherry Farrell Reset. I'm from Regina, born in Manitoba. My family's originally from Quebec. I'm a member of Timiskaming First Nation, but I'm also Métis and Irish connections as well. Been a real thrill to get it here. And just a real thrill to have the local artists included, because we've had that, engagement with local artists in every venue in a different way. Being a proud Indigenous person in this country is a radical act. And when we look at our history and we look at what our grandparents went through and our great-grandparents went through, just hanging on has been radical. And I think most Canadians don't realize that many aspects of being Indigenous in this country was actually against the law. And a lot of beadwork was connected to outlawed ceremonies. It was even illegal at one point to appear in dance regalia, unless it was a government-sanctioned event.
I'm Kathy Mattis. I live in Spruce Woods, Manitoba. I'm Southwest Manitoba Michif, and I get to teach at the University of Winnipeg in the Art History Department and Cultural Studies grad program. Sometimes we create a divide between traditional and contemporary, and I think what Radical Stitch does is show that there's always a continuum, that ancestor artists dreamed a future for all of us, that we would all be surrounded by beaded love, that we'd have the freedom to explore, create, experiment, and be confident in who we are as Indigenous peoples. And artists really help us along. We've always been creating, continuing, and artists are always dreaming the future and responding to the times and educating us, but ultimately wrapping us with their beaded love, and really guiding us and imagining the future for future ancestors.
I'm Michelle LaValle, mother and a curator and arts administrator, and currently I'm the Director of Indigenous Ways and Decolonization at the National Gallery of Canada. I think it's really impactful when people see the show. There's a lot that can be related to. Bead artists are not on the fringe of, arts culture or popular culture. They're very much embedded in culture. So if something happens, they're beating it right away.
One of the great joys that my co-curators and I get to do is each time it travels to another gallery or museum, we get to work with the space and we get to lay out the work. And it's never the same way twice. And it's certainly responding to more colonial settings. And here at the Beaverbrook, we did, I think, certain embedments into particular spaces. One space in particular is the Salvador Dali room. So there's this beautiful room with Salvador Dali works in it. So we placed work that we felt really responded to the Dali work that's in dialogue with that. We wanted to, irregardless of the space, to create opportunities for folks just to have their breath taken away.
Thing with beadwork is its beauty is very tactile and it's undeniable.
And so the stitches represent families and communities, I think is a testament to the ways Indigenous women have provided for their families in many circumstances, because beadwork was a way to put food on the table. It's also keeping these stories intact.
That act of sewing, my friend Greg Schofield is a poet, and he's written this wonderful poem about how, this needle and thread is like a weapon.
These are beautiful.
And it carries our hopes, and it carries our hopes up to the sky. Well, I know for the artists it's had impacts in that the number of galleries and museums that are looking at acquiring contemporary beadwork has increased, and the number of beadwork exhibitions has increased. But the other thing that is also really dear to our hearts is Kathy wants, Michelle wants, everyone who has beaded, we want people to come out with their fingers itching to pick up those needles again. And I think we've been successful in that.
And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night. This is CBC North on your smart TV, because CBC News is now streaming local. Local news and weather on your connected TV or favorite device. CBC News North, streaming now.
They're making more money than they have ever made in the history of the music business.
We have generation after generation of us not seeing a fair piece of the pie.
How do we keep the money from Black music in Black people's hands?
You're going to be introduced to a new world. Stand back.
Which insects are serially monogamous? I'm just curious. Can love help us live longer?
I feel alive!
Does heartbreak make music better? I love this music. Could AI compose the next masterpiece of our time?
Robot composers conducting robot music.
Do you really need to wait 30 minutes after eating before swimming? And why is something as big as time kept in something as small as a watch? Oh, that's heavy. When you get curious, you get CBC.
I think my dislike is warranted.
What was Amy calling it? The beef wars?
You don't tell me anything. You don't share your feelings, open up about your past.
It's not that simple, Amy.
Q with Tom Power. Available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.